Okay, it's time to start. It's 6:30. I'm not going to move around too quickly because I think this feed is a little bit slow. And I don't want the recording to also be annoying. Today we're going to cover meal prep, the way that I do meal prep as a vegan with eating for bodybuilding results, and also just to keep, for me, my particular macros, just to keep myself on track. A lot of clients, and the reason that I'm putting this on is a lot of clients seem to have an issue with being able to put together their meals in a way that's easy for them to understand, and is something that they can continuously do and work on, because they're just struggling with whatever the basics are of putting meals together. And so I'm a little bit inspired anyways by clients who need a little bit of extra help. And what I'm going to do today is show you just basically how I throw meals together and how my head gets wrapped around how I'm going to eat for the day, as well as how I basically structure it so that it works well in a kitchen that's not exactly gigantic. So I'm thinking about my food for the week, and I have a few options. One of them is pre-prepped meals that I've purchased that I've frozen earlier last week because I didn't eat all of them. Another one of my options is some food that I've already cooked and had as leftovers to put in for the week. Then I've got some seitan that I made earlier in the week. That's also going to get thrown in to a few things. And then some other prep that I've done. So the way that I'm structuring my day, or the way my macros work and the way my schedule works, is I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I train my first client really early. And so depending on how my day is structured, I'm either going to have maybe juice or a little bit of oats or maybe chia pudding or something like that. In the event that I'm going to be having oats, then I simply just have a bag of quick oats that I keep on the counter. I portion out the night before, and I do that on a daily basis every morning because sometimes my mornings are going to be different than others. What I've suggested to clients is that if they know that they can keep their schedule the same every single day, go ahead, use some of these meal prep containers and portion out what your breakfast is going to look like. Now, in order to keep macronutrients solid and to make sure you have a decent ratio of carbohydrates, fats, and protein, you're going to want to figure out what the correct macros for your goals are. And then you're going to want to apply that to your day. You're also going to want to make a decision like, well, am I going to eat my breakfast, wait a half an hour and go to the gym? Because that's when you're then going to want to consume the most carbohydrates for the most energy that you can possibly have. So for instance, if you're eating first thing in the morning and then going to the gym, my suggestion would be to have your oats as your slow burning protein or your slow burning carbohydrate. Add some protein of your choice. If you're in a rush and you don't have anything, you can always opt to add protein powder, a scoop of protein powder with your oats, some hot water, mix it up, it's quick. Or you can also opt to add in some tofu if you like that. And you can also put cooked oats in a blender and use that first thing and then head on off to the gym 20 or 30 minutes later. The only thing that I want to stress about carbohydrates and where to place them, especially when you're thinking about structuring your day, is those slow burning carbs are the ones that you should be using pre-workout. So say you're working out in the evening and you don't feel like eating a breakfast type meal, then you're going to want to use something like roasted yams or rice or say chickpeas with some more protein in there. And you're going to want to structure that slow burning carb before your workout and the faster burning carbs after. That means things like bananas, blueberries, fruits, things that are more high in sugar. That's going to help pour protein from our protein shake to our muscles quickly after we work out. But this isn't typically, or this conversation today isn't about bodybuilding necessarily. It's just about arranging food. So for me, for instance, today I'm going to tell you right now exactly what I do and why I do it. And then if you did have any questions, you can always email me afterward, and I'll be sending a video out of this recording to anybody who asks for it. So right now on the stove, I've got going 2 bouillon cubes, veggie bouillon cubes, and some water, because at the end of the day, when I'm not as active, that's when I want to have a light meal, a salad type meal, or a low calorie meal. And for me, an easy one is soup. Just want to move my camera a bit. Oh, my computer's a mini Mac. So today I've got my veggie broth on the stove. Then I've got here prepped, you guys didn't see it, some onions, some garlic, some mushrooms, some celery, some peas, and then I've got 0-calorie noodles here as well. So what you notice about everything happening right here is there's basically no protein in it. It's something I add after, but I'm just making here is a quick soup, especially right now when it's cold out, that I can come home if I'm going to get home later from work and just throw that back on the stove. So I'm going to go over here and just add all of those vegetable ingredients and the noodles. Something else you didn't see that I did, and especially for people who work with me and know that I kind of nag about using my FitnessPal, is because I created a recipe for this soup, and I generally create recipes for most of my things and then decide how many portions I have available in that recipe, divide that recipe by how many portions I've decided. Then when I go to log my food in my FitnessPal, I'm not worrying about counting my macros. So for instance, I would go into my FitnessPal for this particular recipe, and I would put 4 cups of veggie broth, or I think that was about 6, 2 cups of sliced white mushrooms, a couple of bags of the 0-calorie shirataki noodles, a cup of chopped celery, 3/4 of a cup of frozen peas, and whatever else I've added, onions. I'm going to put all that in. Then I'm going to divide that by 6 in the recipe. Now, when I go to have 1 serving of the 6 that I've decided it's going to be, I simply have to go and find my recipe and pick it. If I haven't added the protein yet, that's cool, because if I pick up something like Morningstar chicken strips, or I make my own seitan, or I have some other type of protein I want to add, then I simply just add that raw ingredient on its own with the soup base. So now I've got a couple of days this week dinner already taken care of. Next thing I'm going to do is find some greens for the rest of my meals that I want to make for the during the day. I eat 5 or 6 times, sometimes 7, depending on whether or not it's a leg day. So I've just got some green beans here, put them on a platter. I have an oil mister that I don't like to fill with oil. I put about a 50-50 mix of water and oil. Pump that onto here. And I'm going to bake these in the oven at 350 until they look like they're done. I like to use all different kinds of flavored salts. This one particular, today I'm going to use oak smoked sea salt. Because I train so much and I'm training often throughout the day, an electrolyte replacement for humans isn't just something like Gatorade that's super poisonous, it's also salt. And that's why it's important to add salt to your meals. Make sure you have a great salt and potassium balance. You can also track things like this in a food tracking app like MyFitnessPal or like Chronometer. I wouldn't say to get too freaked out about what your vitamin and mineral intake is until you get a real handle on balancing your food. So I need to prep a mass amount of greens so I can separate them later. I'm just storing these beans in the oven. Done. My soup's sort of on. Now, I've got protein left here. I've got tempeh here. I've got seitan here. I've got tofu here, which I've pressed. And I've also got, for first thing in the morning, a bunch of fruits and vegetables prepped to make juice. First thing in the morning, I like to get up, have some lemon water, right away drink about a liter of lemon water. Right after I've brushed my teeth and done everything else, at least get half a liter in before I come down to do my coffee, my anything for the day. And then on a day when I'm getting up super early and not really doing a lot of moving myself, maybe spotting a client or walking around the gym, I don't want to use my carbs yet. I want that energy for my training later. So my thought process is I'm going to make something that satiates me because there's lots of volume to it, fills me up. So that's my juice, and I have that ready. I'm not going to make it with you here because it's super loud. But I've got that prep today, and then I just make it in 1 liter jars. I usually make 2 of these at a time, so at least I have Monday morning taken care of, Tuesday morning taken care of, and the juice is still fresh. I don't really like to make a week's worth of juice and then store it in the fridge. I don't have enough space, time, energy for prepping all those fruits and vegetables, and I like it better fresh, right from the juicer if I can. Another thing that I keep prepped in a Ziploc bag once I'm done with it is lettuce, a ton of lettuce or spinach. Sometimes I end up buying those mesclun greens, but they go bad very quickly, and I hate food waste. So I find romaine lettuce keeps pretty well. It's not as boring as iceberg lettuce. So I clean it, chop it, spin it, and dry it out, and then I put it in Ziploc bags in the fridge so that my lowest calorie meal at night ends up being a salad or a soup. And all I'm doing is reaching in that bag and plating some vegetables, which I will have to do. I haven't prepped it yet. And then another easy thing to do, I don't always get organics, sometimes they're not available or too expensive, is to buy things prepped already. If you don't have the luxury of extra time, you can buy things like broccoli florets already done, or just cut off the ends because sometimes they're kind of nasty looking. And that's really quick to roast in the oven, throw in a soup, mix up for a salad very quickly with, say, apple cider vinegar, some vegan mayonnaise, some raisins, depending on what your macros are. And that's something else I like to use. My particular carbohydrate, fat, and protein ratios are going to be totally different from yours. And so I already know in my mind how I'm going to tackle those items. But if you don't, my tip is always this. First of all, as a vegan, you're going to have to isolate what protein you're going to want to use. For me, I like to make my own seitan, and I like to use low-fat tofu. And then my third choice would be tempeh, because there's more carbohydrates in it than I need, and I'm going to end up being protein deficient in my day if I try to balance tempeh as a source of protein with the rest of my carbohydrates for the day. Especially if I'm going to eat, greens that are high in it. So when I get a meal, let's say to deconstruct something for you, when I get a meal from Pittsburgh Fresh, for instance, they've broken down macronutrients on here. And this is a tempeh vegan sauteed kale meal. It comes with a ton of tempeh in it. I would say that's like an entire block of tempeh, and then about less than half a cup of wild rice with like 5 frozen peas on it and a thing of frozen kale on the end. I don't particularly like rice, but now I know this is such plain tempeh. I can get a regular light soy, there's a brand name. I can get their macros and it'll be pretty close. They've calculated the macronutrients on here to be 473 total calories, 32.8 grams of protein, 30 grams of fat, and 22 grams of carbohydrates. So for me, my fat for the day is 40 grams. So I can't actually eat this entire meal, and I'll have to deconstruct it. It doesn't mean that meal companies are useless to you. It just means that you have to be very particular about how you're going to use it. So I get out my scale. I don't pre-weigh everything until I kind of have a spread in front of me and I know this is what I'm going to do. So I've got my 2 sources of protein, my tempeh that I've gotten from a meal kit, and this meal kit's probably worth about $10, and I can make 3 meals out of 3 sections of protein out of it. So I find that if I get 10 of these meals, I can stretch them out over 2 weeks, and it works really well, especially if you're in a rush. So I have this first source of protein, and I have my own seitan recipe as a source of protein as well. And then I've got my tofu. So the way that I'm going to decide right now how I'm going to use my protein is by how my week is scheduled. I know Monday, Tuesday morning, I'm going to do my juice. Wednesday morning, I'm going to train legs. I'm going to do something different. I'm only going to prep until Wednesday because Thursday is going to be a slower day. I'll be able to be at home. So Wednesday morning, I would like to have some oats, but I'm not going to train until a little bit later. I need some higher protein. So I've pressed this tofu, and it's the lowest fat tofu that you can find in the store as of right now with that has the macronutrients on it. So I'm going to take out my scale. I'm going to pick a meal prep container, stick it on there. I'm going to zero off my scale so I'm not weighing out the weight of the plastic container. And for me, I know I can have, because I've worked it out, between 3.5 and 4 ounces of protein for of this tofu for protein for my breakfast. So I'm just going to go ahead and weigh out 3.5. There's 3.5. Now, the thing about tofu and the reason you want to press it is because it's full of water. And you don't want that water counting against you in your macros. You're going to go hungry and you're going to be deficient in your overall caloric intake for the day. So I recommend highly that you get something to press your protein. Also, whether you know it or not, whether you're vegan or not, all of the water that comes off of the boxed tofu, likewise with all of the water that comes off your beans, is called aquafaba, and that can be used as sort of a natural replacement for something like xanthan gum, which is a thickener. This one doesn't work as successfully to make meringues and stuff like that, but the ones from chickpeas definitely do. And so make sure maybe you don't throw that all away. You might want to use it for a thickener later. I typically would put all that runoff in another container and keep it in the fridge in case I wanted to make myself some kind of dessert to make the dessert thicker and heavier without adding too many calories to it. So back to my breakfast. I've got 3.5 ounces of my tofu here that I'm going to go back and grab, because my aim here is to use as little protein powder as possible. I want all whole foods. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to put, because I know that this is how much I can fit in my day, 1/8 of a cup of raw oats, like quick oats. So I'm going to cook it later. And I've gone ahead and in some cases taken a weight and turned it into a cup measurement, or taken a cup and turned it into a weight measurement, depending on how life is going that week. If I know I'm going to be somewhere without my food scale for some reason, and I want to know how many cups of tofu equate to 3.5 ounces, then I make those calculations before I leave so that traveling isn't such a pain in the butt. And then I don't have to take as many things with me. So now I've got a mix in here of my tofu and my oats, and that's going to be my breakfast for Wednesday morning. And probably what I'll add at the time when I make this breakfast on Wednesday will be some cinnamon and maybe a little bit of stevia. I'm going to add my hot water and then mix it up. It's nice to have the tofu in there because it really doesn't have a flavor, and it just adds more to the meal than just an 1/8 cup of oats, because that's actually gets to feel kind of pathetic some days when you're really hungry. So that's Wednesday's breakfast done. Again, the other 2 days I'm going to do juice first thing in the morning, and then my larger meal later could be something like that if I chose it to be, or if I have a carb that I already have made, like a roasted sweet potato, I'm going to have that and another source of protein. So tomorrow, for instance, I know I'm going to see a client. I'm going to go back to the office and I have 2 phone calls, and in that time I'm going to be able to have an hour to eat before I train my next client for 45 minutes. Then I'm going to go train myself. So I'm going to I need a carbohydrate, a protein, and some kind of green. I'm going to use this roasted sweet potato that I made on Friday and use that as my carbohydrate, because I can now make 2 meals out of this, my pre and my post workout, and not have to waste it. The way I prep this is actually kind of nice. You half it, and then you score it on an angle in both directions so it kind of looks cubed. And then I just put that in my cast iron frying pan for 4 or 5 minutes to make that dark grill mark on the outside. Then I set my oven to 350, and I just took that cast iron frying pan and I threw the 2 halves in the oven for another 25 or 30 minutes, and it's totally ready to go. So I'm going to create 2 more meals with these meal prep containers. You can get all sorts of sizes, but these typically, as big as my hand, hold enough for 1 meal for a person for every 2 hours. The larger they get, the more you're treading in uncharted territory with having an oversupply of food. To put it into perspective, post-workout for a gigantic 300-pound bodybuilder, 275-pound bodybuilder, they're going to use about 250 grams of carbohydrates for their post-workout, and they're massive. It's about consistently feeding and fueling the body as opposed to overloading it just a couple of times per day to get our metabolisms running efficiently. So I'm going to put that back on the scale. I'm in ounces. You can choose to do grams, whatever floats your boat. You're going to decide, there's less calories with the skin off. You decide how you're going to make your meals. I can't decide for you, especially with your macros, unless you ask me to. So I'm going to throw in that half, maybe a quarter of a roasted sweet potato. That's 2.8 ounces of sweet potato. And if I had my phone here, I would be recording this or writing it down. And then I'm going to take my seitan that I already made. I made a gigantic recipe for seitan way back in the day. And I put that in my Fitness Pal. And I weighed it before I cooked it. I weighed it when it came out of the oven, completely prepared. And I have a reliable recipe for a decent amount of seitan. If you want, you can go on to my Fitness Pal and check it out. So that's how I can rely on just being able to cut this up now, because I'm just following my recipe and weighing it by grams. So then I'm going to change the units on here, tear it out, throw this in, and that's already not enough, I know. 60 grams. I need somewhere for myself between 80 and 100 per meal to hit my goals. Here's 71, 72, 77. I need a smaller piece. 78, 79, 80. Good enough. So I've got my carbohydrate, I've got my protein. And because I made my seitan with oil, there's already fat counted in those macros. There's no oil on that sweet potato other than a minimal amount that would have come off of the cast iron frying pan. So I'm just not going to count that. If you're not going into a bodybuilding contest and you really aren't trying to cut super seriously, you want to be within 5 or 10 grams of your macros. It's not a big deal. I'm going to go in, grab my beans now. They're probably done. Just like to lightly cook them. And they are. And again here, I'm going to add what I know is a cup of green beans to that meal. Done. And that's how it looks. I'm going to set that aside just to cool off a little bit. And then I'm going to do the same thing twice. And what I've got here is just leftovers. I didn't want to make a big deal out of showing you guys how to make any of the proteins or anything. It's just a basic idea of how I look in my fridge on a Sunday night and go, oh, crap. For instance, I didn't think I'd have enough greens. So I grabbed like this huge bundle of gailan that I had. I'm just going to pan fry that. Super tasty. I'm going to do the same as I did last time with my carb. Change the units out from ounces to grams. Tear that off to 0. And now I'm out of seitan and I have no nutritional yeast. So I'm going to have to go to the store tomorrow and get that. I did not go grocery shopping. I haven't been grocery shopping in a week. This is all from food from last week. I've got 80 there, and then I'm just going to throw my beans on. So now I've got my pre and my post workout with my seitan. I've got my breakfast that's going to be made in the juicer. I've got my soup that I'm going to have for dinner. Oh, I shouldn't put that lid on. Food's still hot. I've got my soup that I'm going to have for dinner and add my protein to later. And then I also have a possible salad meal. That's only eating 4 times. So I'm going to need to create another meal for my day. And knowing that I've got my pre and post workout and just a little something for breakfast is probably going to equate to about 10, 15 grams of carbs, mostly water, lots of juice. I'm now going to look at having another meal that's low in carbs. I'm not going to purposefully have carbs high with lots of vegetables and fiber. Now I'm going to turn to this tempeh that I had frozen. And to be honest, I don't really like freezing it and thawing it out again because it dries out really badly. But that's what's going to happen because that's what I've got going on in my life right now. So I'm going to have 3 ounces of tempeh for another meal. And I can choose to either now throw in some pan-fried gai lan that I'm going to be doing up here, or I could add in some lettuce for my salad, and I just always carry along with me apple cider vinegar, throw that on, or a little bit of balsamic, some salt to keep our electrolytes up. If I found that once my meals were created for the day and I plugged them into my Fitness Pal, they're a little low, I might add something like olives for fat because I like that. I like olives a lot. And if I want something that's a natural seasoning alternative, I'll use something like Bragg's liquid aminos to spray on stuff. I've also got some raw red pepper I can throw in. So really, the world's your oyster when it comes to preparing the rest of it. So that's my 5th meal. And I think I'm pretty good with that because I'm also gonna have a shake post-workout in between my post-workout meal. So every day, before I go to bed, I put together my shake. It's super simple. I throw in a scoop of my protein powder. And the reason why I choose the one that I use is because of its macronutrient breakdown. It has nothing to do with how it tastes, really, although it's not that bad. I'm choosing this one because in one scoop, there's 119 calories. This one has 3 grams of fat, 2 carbs, and 20 grams of protein. This is chocolate flavored About Time. I don't like it. It actually doesn't have as good of a nutrition profile as the vanilla, but they keep selling out of it. So I'm going to use that. And then I'm going to use a little bit of glutamine in that for recovery. I also take ZMA at night, like zinc and magnesium combination, but I like to just have this in my bag, especially if depending on where I'm going. Like if I'm going to be at the exercise warehouse, I don't like to drink the water from there, so I like to fill this up with water and then just have it ready to go. If I'm going to go to LA Fitness or something like that, then I'll use the water there. And the protein shake's already done, and my post-workout meals are already done. So that puts me up to, if I include my shake, 6 meals for the day tomorrow. Plus, I've still got all this broccoli that I can roast tonight, and then I'm going to stick it in one of these containers. I've got that soup that we talked about. Then I've got the salad option as well. And that gets me through at least a few days. And then I've got more tofu in the fridge that I'm pressing, or that I can press, and I've got more tofu here. So another low calorie option for your breakfast, or not necessarily low calorie, but low carb if you're trying to stage your meals and maybe not working out right away, is to do a tofu scramble first thing in the morning. And then you can add any of these vegetables, especially if they're already prepped, and it takes like 5 minutes. My favorite thing to do is just throw a bunch of spinach, some onions, tofu, turmeric powder, onion powder, anything like that, and have it ready to go first thing in the morning because it's simple. Anything like making protein pancakes or special breads are going to take a lot of calculation, and that just adds so much stress to the process of meal prepping. So what else do I have to do? What else do I have to show you? That doesn't include any of the supplements I'm taking, I should say. So I take a gigantic cupboard full of supplements and all for various reasons at different times. And so for those of you that are really curious about micronutrients and making sure that your levels of iron are up or your levels of zinc are up for whatever reason, wherever you're training, it's another great reason to be looking at what you're eating every day. A lot of the times I'll see people posting meals that they think, like on social media, because I spy on all of you all and try to look at your MyFitnessPal. They'll be posting meals like, for instance, this whole tempeh one from the meal prep company, and going, well, what's wrong with that? You know, without looking at the macros, it just looks like tempeh, a tiny bit of rice, and a tiny bit of kale. But when you break down what all that is, if you're trying to hit a goal of somewhere around 1,200 calories and you're already eating almost 500 in this one meal, it's going to kind of knock you out of position for the rest of your day. And the whole point of using macros is to show that you can still have a variety of food and have lots of choice, but to also illustrate to you with incorporating a food scale, what enough food looks like. Food typically, you know, used for people to, they celebrate, or they are using it for some emotional reason, or just mindlessly, and people don't really have a great idea about what they're eating and how that affects them. And so there's nothing difficult really about meal prep. I'm going to go to questions in a minute if all of this is working. This is like my second time trying to record one of these. So it's not about getting it down to the last gram of protein, carbohydrates, or fats. It's all about trying to understand what it looks like, so it gives you the freedom to go out and eat a meal and know what's on your plate and what the values of that food are. And so eventually, like for me, honestly, every day I wouldn't be at this point weighing a lot of these meals that I've been eating for years. I know what it looks like. I know now that a cup of this is 3 ounces of that. It's giving yourself freedom, and it's kind of stressful at the beginning to learn it all. But once you do know it, your life looks like 20 containers laid out on the kitchen counter, you know, a bunch of different protein here, a bunch of different carbs here, fats here, and you're done. Making sure you're having your greens in there, and you're just putting it all in, but making batches in the stove or on the oven, whatever it is, or in the oven or on the stove. So I hope that sort of makes it seem more simple. I don't know if it's easier for me if I'm oversimplifying things. I'm going to switch this on to be able to answer questions. I can see I might have muted everybody. Hold on, gallery. Got a few people muted. I think I can see Vanessa. Are you there? Can you hear me? Oh yeah, okay. I can see you typing. Okay, cool. I don't think it's super difficult. Like if there's stuff that comes up later, these are just the options that I use. And I do use also Green Chef. I do also use sometimes Blue Apron if they have a vegetarian. Sometimes they don't. And then I do use Pittsburgh Fresh. But I just make sure that I take those meals and usually divide something like this one into 3, quite honestly. Like I've already got 3 meals out of this one. So I think it's a good option if you're busy. And then again, utilize MyFitnessPal or Chronometer or whatever you have to create recipes, because that's going to be so invaluable for you to like free up your time and make a big batch of chili or a big batch of soup and have a bit of freedom. Because if I wasn't yammering on and on right now, my prep would take me about 45 minutes for 3 days. And I think that's pretty reasonable. It takes longer for me to like get in my car and go drive somewhere to eat than, you know, for one meal. So hopefully that answers questions. If not, I have no problem doing this again next weekend. So thank you everybody for dialing in. I hope it wasn't too crappy of a feed. I'm going to go ahead and make my juice, and then I'll post some pictures of my meals after. That's all cool. This thing's probably going to cut me off. Yeah, anytime. So thank you for dialing in. Vanessa, thank you for typing up, speaking of.
And I'll post the recording out. Have a good night.